嗨，大家好，我是戴淑萱，我来自英国，欢迎回到我的频道。今天是2024年英国大选结果公布日，你可能会想知道这对英国将会带来什么影响。如果你不太了解英国政治也没关系，这部影片会帮你快速了解英国的政治概况。我会用很简单易懂的方式来解释 A. 左翼和右翼的意义， B. 主要政党， C. 这一次选举会带来什么影响。我知道大家都很忙碌，时间有限，所以我把这部影片做得很简单又有趣，希望大家能在20分钟之内能掌握英国政治和基础知识。废话不多说，我们开始吧。政治游戏的目标是找到资本主义和政府支持之间的平衡 ，finding a balance between capitalism and state support。当我们说 state 和 government 这两个单词往往是 interchangeable，so we could also say government support。也就是说，你在多大的程度上介入并提供安全网等等。To what extent do we let people figure it out for themselves？ 也可以说 fend for themselves，like 找到自己需要的，找到自己可以吃的东西。And to what extent should the government intervene and provide safety nets and so on? We can say intervene, 介入, or if your political view is that state intervention is a bad thing, you could use the words interfere or meddle. These sound more negative. 资本主义产生的这个矛盾，产生了左翼和右翼的观念。很多人认为政治好像存在从左到右的范围，但是以下内容过于简单化，因为政治太复杂，无法用非黑即白的术语来理解。It can't really be understood in such black and white terms, but this is still a useful paradigm for everyone to know about. While people often mix up ideas of left and right into one set of beliefs, we could also possibly divide these beliefs into economics-related values and culture or social values. So on the left, in terms of economics, it's all about government intervention. 保持左翼观念的人们，他们通常会认为社会如果能够更平等，这是最好的方式。因此，他们认为政府应该在人们的生活中发挥重要作用，富人应该重税，穷人应该有福利，福利是 welfare， 这很重要。经济繁荣时应该对富人止税，经济需要时才花钱。Left wing 的文化价值我们可以说是 progressive， 进步的，这是保守的相反。他们更有可能会欢迎社会的变革和改革，他们更有可能会欢迎移民。在英国，他们更有可能会认同欧洲，不会有那么多的民族主义者。他们往往不特别专注于传统的家庭和性别的刻板印象。So what about right-wing thinking? 在右翼经济思考中，主要是关于自由市场，努力保护个人自由。政府在人们的生活中应该发挥很有限的作用。政府过度干预被称为 nanny state， 保姆政府。具有右倾价值观的人倾向于支持降低税收和减少商业监管。他们还认为私立公司的竞争能带来更好的服务。在社会价值观方面，他们更加传统，更有可能持有保守观点，例如支持君主制。他们更有可能会反对太多移民，也更有可能会支持脱欧。要了解更多有关哪些英国报纸是左倾和右倾的信息，请点这里观看我另一部影片，这样你读英文的时候可以确定你读的信息是支持你喜欢的观点。那当我们想到最 left-leaning countries 的时候，我们往往会想到挪威、瑞典、丹麦和芬兰，而一些文化上最保守的国家是厄立特里亚、北韩和阿富汗。但其实有趣的是，英国是世界上社会最 left-leaning 左倾的国家之一。So in this graph, we can see that the UK was ranked one of the most socially liberal countries in the world in 2023. We come fourth in culturally liberal views only after Sweden, Norway, and Germany. That means that most people can accept things like abortion, having casual sex, homosexuality, and euthanasia, among other things. Now, what we've found recently is that some people have different views on different sides of the spectrum about different issues, and that might mean that they're dissatisfied with the options presented to them when voting. A typical example is that someone might be left-wing economically, but they're still opposed to immigration. Another thing worth mentioning is that the parties themselves have also shifted, with most parties becoming more centre-leaning and holding views on different sides of the spectrum about different things. 但大多数人仍然从左翼到右 右翼的角度思考，并且有大概的思考这种人应该是 left wing， 或是来自这种地方或是这类型的人他应该是有 right wing views。 例如 Sally the County of Surrey 被认为是非常右翼的，布莱顿 the City of Brighton 则是左翼的。 Now before we talk about who the parties are, let's look at some words that are often used kind of interchangeably. On the left we have left, liberal, Labour, which is actually a party, progressive, socialist, anti-capitalist, left-leaning and left-wing. And on the right we have right, conservative, which is an adjective and it's also the name of a political party, Tory, which is a slang way of referring to someone who votes for the Conservative Party, authoritarian, true blue, neoliberal and reactionary. Now if we think about the extremes, so on the far end of these spectrums, if someone is extremely socialist, then that would be called Marxist communism. True communism is a utopia where there's no government, no property, and everyone contributes all they can to the community and receives all they can in return. A common myth about communism is that everyone is paid the same, but that was never the idea of true communism, and communist countries today tend to operate in a different way, and they do pay people according to their work. So in communism, people are supposed to make money from their work and not from simply owning things. For example, there would be no landlords. Now lots of people in the UK are confused because they've heard that China is a communist country, and so they think of extreme left-wing views. But they also know that there's capitalism in China, so these things seem diametrically opposed to one another. But of course what we have in China today is something different. It's called communism with Chinese characteristics. Now if we talk about the far right end of the spectrum, what might we find there? Far right extremists is a common term used in the world, and what kind of views might an extremist have? Well, things like racism, sexism, fascism and so on. So the Nazis, for example, were definitely far right. And in economic terms, that would mean totally unregulated capitalism with no help from the state whatsoever. Now that we've got that out the way, let's talk about the different political parties. 英国最大的两个政党是工党和保守党 Labour and the Conservatives. 这里我们可以看到2019年的大选结果，然后在右边是4天前的预测，也就是2024年6月19号. So from this we can see that Blue, which is the Conservatives, won a huge number of seats in our last election, and in this election it's predicted that Labour will win back most of those seats. In this graph we can see how people have voted over time since 2017. So again, Conservative peaked around 5 years ago, and now Labour is peaking again. Parties that are generally considered to be left-leaning are Labour, the Scottish National Party, also known as SNP. They had big winnings in Scotland in our last election. Green, which tend to support environmental concerns and currently only have one seat, which is in Brighton, my hometown. We're hoping that we can keep that seat in Parliament this year and maybe gain some new ones. There's Sinn Féin in Ireland, Plaid Cymru in Wales, and the Liberal Democrats, which are much more centre-leaning usually. On the right, we have, of course, the Conservatives, Reform UK, the UK Independence Party, also known as UKIP, who played a large role in the Brexit campaign, and the Democratic Unionist Party in Ireland. 大家一定要看到最后，我等一下给你解释工党赢选举对英国可能会产生什么影响。Now, I just want to reiterate with this graph that the parties are not always exactly black and white, like I've just said them. For example, in one source I found the policies from Labour and the Liberal Democrats are actually more right-leaning this year. Now let's talk about how different types of people in the UK tend to vote. To oversimplify things, young people tend to vote left and older people tend to vote right. Also, people who've graduated from university tend to vote left, and people who have only finished school and not gone to university, which we call school leavers, tend to vote right. 年龄、地理位置、教育和职业背景是某人投票的强大预测因素. Now, on this point, there's a trend that people are voting right later and later in life. so they're becoming older before voting right. And also, education has a stronger relationship with voting choice more than any other demographic or variable apart from age. A trend with education is that before 2016, school leavers tended to vote Conservative and graduates tended to vote for Labour. Right, let's go through this quickly now because we haven't got all day. Basically, age and education are actually linked when it comes to this, because if you think about it, lots of older voters didn't go to university or they didn't need to as much, whereas more young people now are going to university, and this is all tied up with cultural values. For example, university graduates are more open to immigration and stuff like that. Now, there's a common quote, not sure if you've heard of it: if you're not liberal when you're young, you have no heart, and if you're not conservative when you're old, then you have no brain. I'll let you be the judge of that. If we talk about another demographic, gender hasn't typically played a role in how people vote, although there is a trend recently around the world where more and more men, especially young men, are voting right, whereas women are voting left, which is kind of a worrying trend to see this divergence between men and women's thinking. And lastly, on the topic of demographics, ethnicity, well, we obviously have a South Asian Prime Minister, but no one actually talks about this because age and education seem to matter more when it comes to people's votes. Having said that, other ethnic groups tend to vote for Labour, but this is a massive generalisation. Now, of course, it's very important for all different kinds of people to be represented in politics, so hopefully we'll be able to see more and more diverse politicians. That is a very liberal thing of me to say. So what might happen in this election and what are the policies? Well, basically everyone thinks that Labour's going to win, but I'll just outline some overall trends and some things that are in their manifestos while we're here. The manifesto, by the way, is the long document that the party produces saying this is our plan, this is what we're going to do if we get elected. Now, bear in mind this is incredibly brief and whole essays could be written about this, but here we go. First of all, we have a global trend in that leaders are becoming increasingly unpopular, from France to Germany to Canada, so it's not unusual that in the UK, our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is not very popular at the moment. There's also lower trust for all the parties compared to in the past. Another trend is that politics is increasingly volatile. If we look at the 2019 election, Labour had the worst result they had since the 1930s, whereas it looks like this year could be the worst result for the Conservatives in 150 years. So that's quite extraordinary to see the country swing from right to left so drastically, if that's what happens today. By the way, I just want to sneak in a piece of vocab here. Tactical voting is when you vote for someone who's not your first choice, like not your favourite party, but you do so to prevent another party getting in. For example, if your favourite party is the Green Party, but you know that in your area or in your constituency, that's a voting area, so if you know that in your constituency Green are very unlikely to get voted in, then you might vote Labour with the hopes that by having a Labour MP or Member of Parliament, then that would prevent a Conservative MP from getting in your constituency. Does that make sense? So in this year's election, these are the things that people are most concerned about. First, the economy, fixing the damage that Brexit has done. Second, healthcare, fixing our NHS. Third, housing, especially fixing the situation for first-time buyers, because it's so hard to get a mortgage these days. And fourth, immigration. It's generally agreed across most of the parties that there's been too much immigration happening towards the UK recently. Now let's look at a few points in Labour and Conservatives' manifestos. By the way, I heard one reporter say that lots of people don't actually care about these policies this year. What they care more about is leadership. So someone with character and credibility who can lead us back into a closer relationship with Europe. So what might Labour have in store for us? First of all, they say they're not going to increase income tax, VAT or national insurance for working people. They say they're going to invest in the NHS, that's our national healthcare system, with 40,000 more appointments and scans, doubling the amount of CT and MRI scanners, dentistry package and so on. There's going to be a VAT on private school fees. This is a typical left-wing policy because it's about taxing the rich, right? And in education, there'll be 6,500 more teachers, more teacher training, and GB Energy, a new publicly owned clean energy company. They also plan to address the housing crisis by building 1.5 million new homes. One of the biggest issues in the UK at the moment is that there simply aren't enough houses for the number of people that there are, which is why our property is so expensive, so that's why they plan to build so many homes. So it's a long list of aspirations and there is a lot of change in there. But as always, there are some issues. Where are they going to get the money from? There's already £18 billion worth of cuts, which the Conservative Party already put in their forward spending plan and Labour agreed to it. So if Labour wanted to avoid those cuts, they'd have to find it elsewhere. Some people think that Labour are boxing themselves into an austerity budget. Austerity means a period of lower spending, and for obvious reason, lots of people don't like that. Now you might be wondering, why don't we just have a more Swedish system with higher taxes and higher spending? Well, that might be a good idea, but the parties believe that that's not where the public is, and of course they need to win the public's votes. Onto the Conservatives' manifesto. Let's whip through these because they're probably not going to get in anyway. They had mandatory national service for 18-year-olds. That means that 18-year-olds would have to go to the army. Very unpopular. Tax help for the self-employed. I could get behind that. Help to buy scheme, providing first-time buyers with a loan. Tougher sentences and new prisons. No more low-quality degrees. Increased defence spending. And a triple lock on pensions to match inflation. So what have the Conservatives done well over the last 14 years that they've been in power? Well, they have reduced tax for a lot of people, and they have increased literacy through a phonics program. Lots of people are saying, though, that the biggest problem with their manifesto is about immigration. They're saying that they're going to keep a lid on it, but actually they've been letting over 700,000 people into the country this year and last year, which most people agree is far too much. A better number would be in the tens of thousands of people. So you might be wondering, what's the point of all this politics stuff anyway? We just seem to switch between the same two parties every year. Is anything actually happening? Is anything really changing? Well, this is a big reason why lots of people in the UK are disillusioned by politics, as I'm sure they are in many other countries. But what this system does do, it forces the parties to challenge each other and to fight for what the people want. So even if sometimes it feels like a lot of promises that aren't coming true, by the way, you can say that politicians don't deliver on their promises, or they don't follow through on their promises, or you can just say they have a lot of empty promises. But there's only so long that a party can do that before they're going to get booted out and replaced by someone else. So it's supposed to protect against corrupt leadership. Whether our system does a good job of that, and whether frequent changes in leadership are good for our country, are a matter worth considering. And it's probably about finding a balance. So what do you think about our system? And how does it compare to the system in your country? Give this video a like if you want to see how does British politics work, why are British people really apathetic about politics, and who are the key figures in British politics. 英国政治的重点整理懒人包就到这边啦。如果你很喜欢这一次我分享的内容，你想获得更多有关英国的生活语言跟文化的实用资讯，请订阅我的频道。想进一步学习改善语言和英文口音，可以去 Susie 网站看看。我们下次再见。